you for joining us. I'm Farah Nasser. Each year during the holidays, we look back at the year gone by and all of the stories covered by our journalists right across the country. This, clearly, was a year like no other, with the pandemic affecting our daily lives in almost every possible way. COVID-19 dominated the headlines, and not only did we cover it extensively, it also affected how we brought you those stories. Reporting on provincial elections and, of course, the U.S. election was challenging during the pandemic. Travel restrictions and physical distancing were top of mind as crews headed out to cover new leaders in New Brunswick, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the United States.
Good evening, and thanks very much for joining us for Decision BC.
In a year unlike any other, voters in 3 provinces headed to the polls for elections unlike any other.
Good evening. Welcome to Decision New Brunswick 2020.
New Brunswick was the test case. Premier Blaine Higgs gambled big on September 14th, followed by British Columbia's John Horgan on October 24th and Saskatchewan 2 days later. 3 different provinces, different issues, and varied campaign promises. Yet one common theme runs through them all: the COVID-19 pandemic. As soon as the Ritz dropped, Global News journalists covering the pandemic for months knew election coverage in 2020 was going to be surreal. In a year where the majority of Canadians are working from home, our Global News journalists included, covering an election meant virtual instead of face-to-face contact with politicians. Candidates vying for your vote experiencing something very different as well.
Rallies were gone. Door-to-door knocking for most candidates was gone. All of this felt very, very different. And for us, it was very different because it was done, for me in my basement, making phone calls, dialing into press conferences, trying to understand what it was like on the ground without ever stepping foot on the ground.
2020 also changing how many Canadians cast their votes.
The question of how people were voting really affected our presentation because really enormous numbers of people voted in advance.
When election night came, our network team that travels to support local teams with their coverage had to find a way to help without actually being there.
We had to create a virtual decision desk. So basically that consisted of me having a whole lot of computer screens, really large monitors with multiple screens within those TV monitors, and then connecting by phone to a number of different people.
Those channels of communication had to be so fluid so that the decision desk could talk to the producers, could talk to the control room, which by the way was in Edmonton, and then they could talk to me here in the studio in Halifax.
And then the countdowns and preparations were finally over.
Obviously here today, it's not as big of a celebration as it would be because of the COVID pandemic.
Election night, usually a room filled with candidates, supporters, and media from wall to wall. This year, the guest lists were minimal.
Normally on election nights, we're used to gathering with groups of volunteers and a chance for the political parties to say thank you to everyone for going out and making this election possible. But it was just, again, really eerie, really quiet.
A quiet headquarters meant a quiet celebration.
When they came to me, one of the lines I said was, there was one solitary woo that I heard when Global News called the election.
After the Canadian provincial elections came another news story of the year, the U.S. election.
Jackson Prosco, who's here with me in Washington. Jackson, that was
Many Canadians were keeping an eye on the results across the border. And sending a team down south meant crews had to quarantine for 14 days after returning home to Canada.
Great to have you here.
As journalists, it's our responsibility to cover all the twists and turns on the campaign trail and bring you election night results. But doing it in a global pandemic meant reimagining the way we work.
Typically, we'll fly resources in there, either technical or editorial. But of course, that's not going to happen during a pandemic. So we had to find a way to get our best and brightest to New Brunswick, in the case of our smallest market, and help them remotely. And I'm really excited about how we used our connectivity, our technology, but more importantly, our people to glue it all together.
Another common thread among these elections, the dedication to cover the campaign and election night and bring you, the viewer, all of the information along the way. even with changing provincial and federal COVID-19 restrictions during the pandemic.
These are the people that are going to lead you. These are the people that are going to make the decisions with your money. And it is my responsibility and our responsibility to give you the information to help make those decisions.
2020 was indeed an election year like no other.
Virtually every industry had to change how it conducted business in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's true for broadcast journalists too. Reporting the news usually means getting up front and personal with people. But with COVID-19, that practice ended practically overnight. For those of us who work in the field, it was a scramble to find new ways to do our jobs.
Guys, my arm, for crying out loud!
Until 2020, most journalists were unfamiliar with the idea of physical distancing. News reporting is all about getting close to the story, close to the people behind the story.
The biggest difference is we do far fewer interviews in person. We use our computers.
I'm going to get you to stand right there and have your feet to there.
In an instant, journalists altered their approach, the way they covered their stories.
Him in his car, me in mine.
Reporters and camera crews, typically a tandem, teams that now frequently work in isolation.
Our journalists have a commitment to covering this incredibly important story, but they also have a commitment to keeping themselves safe, keeping their colleagues safe, keeping our community safe.
The mandate was clear. Find ways to tell stories and do it responsibly in a pandemic.
As I need you to shoot your own video.
Television reporters adapted and sometimes must instruct their story subjects too.
For TV, we have to do it sideways.
Supposedly, yeah.
When reporters were meeting story subjects in person, the preference was outdoors.
The company says it went to great lengths.
Like many workplaces, we're not congregating inside, so this park became our outside all-season studio.
Veteran reporter Eric Sorensen now actually presents his stories from a field near his home. But explaining a pandemic to viewers in a meaningful way day after day, that's not so straightforward.
Learning about infection curves has been a steep learning curve for all of us.
And like millions of Canadians, people who deliver the news have a new challenge on top of the regular daily deadlines. With school canceled for months, some reporters must juggle another duty during the day as caregivers.
Parenting during work hours is a whole other level. Certainly a struggle.
Reporter Karen Lieberman has 2 young children. She's conducting interviews and writing stories from her kitchen table.
I get to be here when the kids come home for dinner, and I never miss bedtime anymore, so there are highlights.
Karen's makeshift voice recording studio.
I bring my microphone upstairs, and this is the closet I've chosen. It is my daughter's closet, and it just seems to have the best acoustics.
Microphones play a part in a pandemic too. The importance of keeping a distance from story subjects means that gathering sound is a new challenge. Companies that make professional boom poles innovate new solutions.
You have the ability to keep your distance from your talent or your interviewee, as well as have a protection so they're not getting saliva and contaminants all over your microphone.
Reporting in a pandemic reminds those in the field about safety all the time. In November, reporter Jeff Semple and his cameraman are confronted not just with health concerns while covering a rally after the U.S. election in Detroit. A pandemic and disputed results brings out this.
What'd you say?
What are you going to do if they declare Biden the winner?
Talking to you remind me to clean my gun, but I'm going to be ready for him, trust me.
Then there was the reaction after a defiant Toronto business is forced to close. It made television crews the targets of anger.
You guys lie, but they'll be knocking on your door one day.
Journalists, accustomed to covering a story, are now under attack for their reporting.
Your time is going to come.
2020 had begun like any other year, with optimism, expectations, and no real inkling of what was ahead. We didn't know we'd be covering stories about people getting sick and dying from a virus not seen before, or reporting on shuttered businesses, or reporting from empty airports because people weren't traveling anymore. We had no idea that after a while we'd be wearing masks on air to report the news. As for enforcement, none today. We're told that may change in the days ahead. One fact of life, for reporters and camera crews in lockdown areas, it can be hard or impossible to find a working bathroom.
If you're working at home, you can drink your coffee or water, and when it's time to go to the washroom, it's right there. Where when you're in the field, there is nothing. You're looking for places that are open or people that will may or may not let you use the washroom.
2020 was a year where everything changed for everyone, including the messengers.
I'll never forget it. The very first time I went, within half an hour, 3 bodies came out.
In March, the pandemic was still new. Schools and non-essential businesses were shut down. But when Heron happened, everything changed.
I was like, what the hell is going on here? I couldn't believe it.
And that was our first indication that there was something terribly wrong.
Heron is a private seniors home in the western part of Montreal. There were media reports that staff had abandoned the residents, rumors that clients were severely neglected. Then on April 11th, the premier dropped a bomb on the province.
We learned that since March 13, there's been 31 deaths at Residence Heron.
It was a jolt, I think, to everyone, to the entire province. Okay, wait, this is a tragedy now.
One interview I did with a retired nurse who had gone in there to help was just unforgettable.
We went from room to room, and every room then, the stench of urine and feces could have killed a horse.
My own great uncle was living at the Heron, Sam Abrason. He was 102 years old, and he was really sharp. He was really with it. My family couldn't reach him for days, and then we heard he was dead. And like so many other families, we were left to wonder, did this man die, neglected, dehydrated, and starving?
No one could have expected or anticipated just how bad it was, how much COVID there was inside that establishment, and it turned out very quickly inside many others, just one after the other. It was just devastating.
Though Quebec has had by far the most COVID deaths, mainly because of the situation in seniors' homes, the same thing played out across the country.
Just a heartbreaking situation here at Pinecrest Nursing Home in Bobcaygeon.
Our worst nightmare and possibly beyond that came true.
It was so hard to separate life and work because you weren't just looking at it through a camera lens, you were feeling it.
The breaking point here in British Columbia was at the Lynn Valley Care Center.
They said another person died at the Lynn Valley Center, and I'm kind of like, well, that was my mom.
These aren't just numbers. It's just not figures. It's not a 10-person increase in deaths day over day. You know, those are 10 people who have had lives, who have loved ones, who have served our communities, and they're now gone.
And then the military arrived. Just seeing uniformed soldiers in my community going into a seniors home because they did not have enough staff to take care of people, it was shocking.
People were clapping. Listen, this situation is so dire.
Because of their experience organizing things in crisis and putting things together and getting things sorted out, I think they were able to bring that expertise.
Another care home that really stood out was Vigie Mont-Royal. About 50 soldiers were deployed to help there, many donning equipment that looked like spacesuits. I did some digging and found out that was because the ventilation system inside had broken down.
All the patients were positive.
The next day, I received a private Twitter message from a nurse working there that said she was grateful we were able to expose that situation, telling me, "Your journalistic work is essential. Don't give up. We owe it to the 70 dead, families, healthcare workers, and survivors there." That meant everything to me.
The sort of heartwarming, I'd say, side for us is that some of our stories really did lead to improved conditions and change.
All of the media companies and all of the journalists were working together to try and get those answers in a way that I'd never seen us work together before.
In mid-December, Quebec seniors' homes got their first doses of the COVID-19 vaccine.
In that box were little things that would have saved people's lives. I mean, that's a huge freaking deal.
I've never worked on a story that just day after day after day didn't end. It was really overwhelming. I've never seen anything like it.
For 14 days, you're pacing the floor back and forth, hoping that the worst doesn't happen.
Felt like my system was being short-circuited.
every day it seemed like a new symptom presented itself.
You go through it all, you hear about it, but you never expect it to be yourself.
I don't know where it came from. I don't care. When you get it, you won't care.
I really wanted to know what it feels like to get COVID-19. You know, forget the numbers for a moment. I wanted to hear the experiences from people of all walks of life.
I'm Evan, I'm 19.
Natasha Reynolds, I am 50.
Carter Stanley, I'm 72 years old.
Kevin Stanley, I'm 42 years old.
The fever was probably the first thing I found. I was just super tired, didn't move for a couple days.
1 minute I was fine, and literally the next minute I had this overwhelming fatigue, like a wall of fatigue.
I literally started shaking like a leaf, like I was sitting in a bowl of ice.
It attacked my brain, and I could feel it sending the pain to my back and my hips and down my legs.
Everything hurt. My skin hurt. My eyes hurt.
I couldn't sleep. Every time I'd fall asleep, like something in my brain would just wake me up.
I started losing my taste and smell, which lasted about a week, which was really bad.
Fever's hitting close to 40 degrees. Is tonight going to be the night my lungs are going to give up? It's hell. It really is.
And all the while these people are trying to recover, they're also thinking about the impact, the spread, who's got to isolate around them, and the stigma. In many cases, some people feeling judged for getting COVID-19.
It feels like, you know, like you've done something wrong. And because you did something wrong, you got this.
How it spreads is incredible. My plumber, my drywall guy, my dad, then we obviously took it home, so then it went into my wife.
It's a life-changing event for them. And so you're documenting that and taking it all in. And if you're seeing all these people who did all the right things get this illness, and you're thinking, you know, I could get this at any time.
This is serious. People need to take it serious.
It's a little frustrating for me now because even I wasn't doing the best I could have to stop it. I think I got a pretty good immune system, but it's not a joke.
And it's so unpredictable. One person can just have the sniffles. The next person on the other extreme ends up in the hospital. And then you have a bunch of us that are in the middle that are just trying to make our way through every day, hoping there's no long-lasting effects.
A lot of people have been describing symptoms that continue several months after getting the virus. They talk about moments of fatigue, brain fog, dizzy spells, and chest pain. Thousands are sharing their stories online to find some sense of community.
I needed to speak to other COVID survivors. Some people are feeling very isolated, and it's a good place to find the strength and the courage to support one another and be there for one another.
I spoke with over a dozen people who got COVID-19, most not wanting to share their stories on camera, but many telling me they just want other people to hear their experiences, to know that what they're going through, other people are going through too, and to just really be kind to one another.
So this spring was really just an unbelievable time in Nova Scotia. It felt like weeks upon weeks of unrelenting grief and sadness.
It's really hard to put into words the heaviness of this year from a news perspective.
23 people are dead at 16 different crime scenes. That includes the gunman who terrorized this province for more than 12 hours.
A search and rescue mission is underway now after reports that a Canadian military helicopter has crashed off the coast of Greece.
This one, again, hitting really close to home. Jennifer Casey, as you mentioned, was from Halifax, a former journalist.
It was almost this layer of extra darkness when you factor in COVID.
The pandemic has had such a deep impact on people's ability to heal because even as communities, we weren't able to get together. We weren't able to stop in and, knock on a neighbor's door and just check in or bring over a meal. Those are the kind of things you want to do after a tragedy like this, and you just can't. There was a virtual vigil which was put together and it broadcast on that Friday night after the shootings.
Today, we join together in remembrance.
normally in a community like ours, most small towns in fact, we lean on each other in good times and bad. And if something like this were to happen, we would gather to grieve, but we can't do that right now, which is how this event was conceived.
It really was an opportunity because of the pandemic to bring a virtual comfort blanket to all of us.
I want to play a tune for you that I chose because of a beautiful performance I saw a couple of days ago, played by one of the victims, Emily Tuck.
I think one of the biggest stories too to come out of all of these tragedies was how Nova Scotians really did rally together. You know, Nova Scotia Strong was something that was being shared on social media, hashtag Nova Scotia Strong.
When you take a drive through our province or walk or bike, you still see signs of we are in this together. There'll be rocks painted with Nova Scotia Strong. People have little memorials set up still outside of their mailboxes.
And it's been really beautiful to see those things happening, to see communities like Portapic trying to refocus their energy into building something positive after a tragedy like this. But the healing process is going to take a long time.
I'm Farah Nasser. We end this year like no other with hope of what's ahead. And we hope you have a chance to celebrate the season, the sacrifices of this year, and a brighter 2021. Thank you for spending time with us.